What's going on, everyone? So, Scream 6 is the last time we, more likely than not, will see of Sam, Tara, Chad, Mindy. Now, it's always possible that maybe like a Mindy or, a Chad or somebody ends up having a cameo or returning or whatever later on down the line. I think Jenna Ortega and Melissa Barrera, I don't really think that they'll return, but we'll see. Time will tell as we move forward. But we know in Scream 7 that more likely than not, none of these characters are going to be in, which means that it's very possible that they just go in an entirely new, entirely fresh direction. Now, this upcoming Scream 7 film, we know Neve Campbell's back, Sidney Prescott. This is supposed to be a Sidney-centric film. They are supposed to introduce some new characters, kind of have characters that could potentially be the future of the franchise, but it's supposed to be about mostly Sidney and her family. Right, Mark Kincaid, Patrick Dempsey is supposed to be back in this film. No, she's supposed to see her children, which again I've mentioned. I love the dynamic and potential for like, hey, here is a Scream film in which we've never seen this version before of like a family being attacked by Ghostface. Oh, and that family is Sydney's. And oh, by the way, Sydney's going to have to not only protect herself and take down Ghostface, but she's also going to have to take care and protect her family as well, right? There's stakes. I like that. I think that there's a lot of potential. But how do they approach this film with Scream 6 in mind, right? Courtney Cox, Gale Weathers, she's supposed to be in this film. Last we saw her, she was on the brink of death. We know she survived, but she's kind of the bridge gap, right? She's the one that was in New York, survived, whatnot. How far do they go with the tie-in and connection to Scream 6 and maybe even potentially Scream 5 without, like the core four characters in particular not being in this film, right? Because again, you're not going to have Sam and Tara in this movie, but you're going to have Gale, right? Like, is it kind of just a throwaway line dialogue where maybe Sidney mentioned, how's Sam, how's Tara, how are the four kids or whatever, and Gale kind of gives you a little like, oh, they're good, like they went and they're doing their own things or whatever, and kind of give you like a quick little rundown of like where they are, right? So kind of, give you that proper send off. Do they just completely ignore it altogether and just kind of brush it over? If I had to guess, I think that they just ignore it altogether. I think that they just do something where, Gale, she shows up, right? Maybe she's recovering or she just got over recovery and she's goes and visits Sidney, or maybe she's staying with Sidney or something like I see something like that to where it's like, it's been a year or whatever, and they just kind of brush it under the rug. They don't really talk about it or mention it and just kind of, have Gale just whatever, right? Like, but I also don't know if like that's entirely the right approach, right? Like, because all of these Scream movies to an extent have had some level of continuation or tie-in or connection or something to, the predecessors, right? Like, Scream 4 in a lot of ways was kind of like had this like separation, this disconnect, but it's still like it still had its tie-in and connection, right? Like, because the last time we saw Sidney, she was hiding away in her house, and like, yeah, she was just finally getting, kind of the symbolism at the end of her kind of, she leaves the door open when it blows open, and hey, he said, we're watching a movie, like that whole sequence, right? But you pick up in Scream 4, stepping out of darkness, right? She's tired of hiding, like she's tired of being isolated and secluded. She's coming out in the open. You still had these direct ties and connections. Do they do something like that in Scream? Do they have, maybe they have like a Leslie Mocker, right? As like a little reference to Scream 6, or, do you get a, like Sam and Tara's mom or something like that, right? Like, do you get some type of connection? And is that even the right approach to have, right? Like, because like, again, and of course, I want to hear your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. This is kind of just a conversation video, just something that was popping in my mind that I was thinking about. But to me, it's like, okay, you if you have this film kind of be a Sidney focused, Sidney centric film, she doesn't really have any ties to anybody outside of Gale, right? Like, yeah, she showed up, but she didn't show up for Sam in Scream 5. She wasn't there for the core four. Like, she wasn't even really there for Gale, right? She was there to kind of avenge Dewey, right? Like, she showed up to basically like, hey, we need to put a stop to this type thing, right? Like Dewey meant the world to me. Like, I'm not just gonna stand by and let this ghost face just relish in it, right? Like, so you could, I think, make a real argument that maybe the best course of action is just Sidney picks up, this is a Sidney film. Like, why would we need to have any connections to Scream 6? And I'm not saying that you have to have like any major direct tie-ins. I'm not saying that like a killer from Scream, Detective Bailey survived and he's going after Sidney now or anything, right? Because you also don't want it. You don't want there to be a connection to where you feel like, oh, why did you do that when you know Sam and Tara aren't going to be back, or Sam and Tara aren't in this film anymore, and you just like, maybe that's why like the mother route, right? Christina Carpenter. Maybe you don't. Maybe that wouldn't be a good idea because it's like, okay, well then you'd imagine at some point you'd probably see the Carpenter sisters, right? Like, it's just you also don't want to make a connection to where it's like you almost have to have, because that's what they did in Scream 5, right? Like with Mark Kincaid and stuff. So Scream 5, you established Sidney's children. You established that she is married to Mark Kincaid, right? We got the confirmation, all that stuff, right? Well, what that did is it kind of painted them into a corner. And then in Scream 6, Sidney didn't, Nev with the money situation, right? She doesn't come back. And it's like, oh, so we're just never going to have that tie-in. Well, now Sidney's back, Nev's back. Now you have to have Mark Kincaid. Now you have to have her children, right? Because it's like, how long can you go without having that tie-in and connection? At what point do you go just, man, Mark Kincaid is the worst husband ever. He just keeps letting Sidney go and fight off Ghostface alone. Like, it just, at some point, you can't establish and lay the groundwork and the foundation of that to not have that payoff at some point. And again, now we're supposed to be getting that payoff, but I mean, going into Scream 6, you thought that this would never happen, right? Because Sidney, because look, if everything worked out the way that, the studios and stuff thought it was going to work out, we may never have gotten Nev back, right? We may never have gotten Sidney in another Scream film. Scream 6 had success and Sidney wasn't even in the film, didn't really need Sidney in the film, right? Like, they probably would have kept telling stories with Sam and Tara and, in the core four, and that would have been that, right? So we may have never actually gotten that glimpse, but now that you established it, now it's like, okay, well, now you need the payoff. So you also don't want to do something like that, but I do think that there should be some type of just connection. Now, maybe it could be something minor, right? It could just be something as simple as like, the dreaded thread that was established in Scream 5 that kind of set up the cult where, you were able to have Amber and Richie meet each other and whatnot, right? Like these forums. Maybe it's just, again, it doesn't have to be, some like crazy direct tie-in, but I do think you should have something that kind of bleeds over from 5 and 6 that makes sense. And like I said, maybe it is the cult aspect, right? Maybe it is that, like, maybe you highlight more on that dreaded thread and it's like, okay, that's kind of the reference point. That's the tie-in. That's the thing that you can point to the previous films, right? Gale being attacked and, or maybe you bring Kirby back and you have her kind of have some type of, part that kind of bridges everything together. Again, you don't necessarily have to do anything that's like crazy. You don't have to have this be like a direct sequel to Scream 6 or anything like that. But there are going to be things that, especially again, if you have, a Gale Weathers in this film, the last time we saw her was in a basically compromised position in Scream 6, right? So it's like you got to have something there, right? Like, there's got to be something that you need to kind of have kind of mesh together. But I don't know. It's just like I said, it's just kind of a thought that popped in my head that I wanted to kind of discuss and have conversations with y'all. So as always, this is a discussion. Pass question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? Are you in the camp that like no, like because again, I do get like you don't really need to. You could just hey, here's a Sidney movie, enjoy, right? Type thing. Like we don't need to have nothing. Like Sidney has no direct, and that to me is kind of, I guess they're like kind of get out of jail free card, so to speak, right? Like because again, Sidney has no real ties, connections, relationships, anything that you're like, like where if Sidney and Sam were, hunting down Ghostface together or something, right? Like, it's like, well, wait a minute. So, what? How did Sidney just branch off from Sam, right? She just decided, I'm leaving. Like, if there was something where it's some like direct, like they're linked, then sure, like then you kind of have no choice. But luckily with Sidney, there's not, right? Like like they might not even have exchanged numbers or anything. Like it's kind of just this. The last time Sidney saw Sam, she was sitting on an ambulance going like, hey, basically good luck to you, kid. Like you're gonna be fine, type thing. Right. So I do think that that's kind of like your get out of jail free card with that tie-in and that connection. But do you feel the same way, or do you think like no, you gotta have some type of crossover or bleed through? Do you think it could be as simple as, like I said, like the dreaded thread, that post, or maybe have Kirby back and there's some tie-in? Again, how do you feel? Whatever your thoughts are, love to hear. Let me know down in the comments below. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. Helps me a lot. Helps me enjoy these types of videos, and I truly appreciate it. If you're not subscribed to the channel, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one.